Hello.
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 Cool, I can hear you guys now.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Great. Great. Give it a couple more minutes. People a chance to jump on. Give it like one more minute and we'll get started. Okay, great. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you for joining us today, this afternoon for some, this morning for others. It's just 12 o'clock, a little after 12 in Arizona, so I want to go ahead and get started. My name is Steve Couch. I'm the head of sales here at BIM Designs. And I thought that it was going to be it was a perfect time to talk about resource planning as we end the year. If you get into Q4 and start ending the year and starting to plan for next year. We get a lot of questions every day from people on how to overcome the extreme BIM staffing shortfalls that exist around this region and across the country. So I wanted to put this webinar together to kind of give people a better guide as to how to better plan for resources and to better plan out their BIM needs for the following year. So the big problem to solve basically is across the country is how can contractors really plan for, budget, schedule, secure, which is like hiring and training, and deploy BIM resources at the best time to meet production needs amid a national and growing labor shortage. So because we know that these problems exist, I wanted to just kind of throw in a quick poll to see first. Oh, let me, Josh, we're coming in. So I wanted to just to conduct a quick poll, and Jamil, if you throw up the quick poll just to see, just to get a gauge for where people's problems are lying and the biggest problem. We're going to do like a little chart your own adventure course style presentation here. So based on the feedback, we'll be able to decide which direction we go next. So you should see a poll that just popped up on your screen right now. And the question is, what's your biggest resource planning challenge? So you just pick, one of those. Is it managing the labor peaks and valleys? So there's BIM projects that come up and go down. Is it not enough staff? Your biggest resource challenge is you just don't have enough people to pull from. Maybe that problem is not enough lead time before a project starts. So you bid on a bunch of projects, they finally let you know a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the project starts that boom, you got it, and you need to start planning for BIM support. Is there a lack of BIM partners? Do you just not know who to reach out to and you don't have enough people to partner with? Is there a lack of management? That's your biggest resource planning challenge. There's not enough people in management to sit back and think about those higher level needs and processes in order to enable you to plan your resources better. Is there inadequate planning tools? Maybe you need another tool that you don't currently have in your arsenal that would help you better prepare for challenges. So choose one of those responses, whatever it is, and we'll see what the results are. Okay, and Jamil, you have to let me know how to display what the results are for everyone and to get that once that's submitted.
Yeah, I believe it's finished being conducted, and it'll end the poll and it should show what the results are.
Perfect.
We'll just give it another 10 seconds here.
Great. Great. Let's see. So I don't know if I should stop sharing or not. Got it. Look at that. Okay, so most people said not enough lead time before a project starts, which is awesome. That's good. That's a good problem to solve for. Not enough staff, managing the labor peaks and valleys were tied for the next. So it looks like not enough lead time before a project is a common problem that we have here. So that's perfect. And to think about why it's a good problem to solve. So we know that increased BIM use is correlated with improved customer satisfaction and design quality. This is according to Dodge Data and Analytics, a survey they did from a special BIM marketing report that they released earlier this year that says there's improved customer satisfaction and design quality. There is, let me see if I can click here, reduce risk reduction and reduce errors and constructability issues. There's actually higher project win rates, higher cost controls, reduced defects on handovers, increased company revenue potential when deploying BIM as opposed to not deploying BIM. So the next question I want to ask is, and Jamil's going to pull up that poll question now, is when we have those typical problems that come in, who's responsible for recognizing the need? So who says we need more people? Who within your organization, who says we need more people? Is it the BIM manager who identifies the need for more people, more BDC resources specifically? Is it the company executives that decides? Is it the BIM coordinator that looks and says, okay, to meet these coordination deliverable schedules, I need more coordinators, I need more BIM modelers? Is it the project manager for the job that says I need more people? Is it the estimating team when they estimate on the project, or is it maybe just someone else? And the second question is, so the first person is who recognizes the need. The next question is, well, if someone recognizes the need, is it then that same person who has to then solve the problem, or do they pass that problem to someone else? And would that be the BIM manager, or company executives, project manager, whose responsibility is it to solve the problem? So you make your selections. We'll give it another 10 seconds, and then we'll see what those results are. Great. So we see that about a third of people said company executives notice that there's a problem and recognize the need. The BIM coordinator will say there's a need, or the estimating team will say that's a need. Awesome. We'll respond to each one of those and give some tips to each one of those stakeholders. And then who's responsible for solving it? The company executives solve it. Does the project management solve it? And maybe someone else solves the actual problem once they identify that there is one. Great. So that leads me into my next slide, is when to start planning. So when should you start thinking about resources and planning resources for your BIM projects? When should the planning start? Well, one good time to plan for it is when revenue forecasting. So if you're getting ready to look at and saying, okay, a company is at $80 million this year, we want to be at $120 million next year. In order to satisfy that revenue goal and to reach that revenue goal, we need to do A, B, C, 1, 2, 3 in order to reach it. And usually as a part of that process, BIM should be included, especially if it's utilized in the field to drive your offsite construction and pre-construction efforts and prefabrication efforts, I should say. When submitting bids, one of the things that we run into all the time is that a company will tell us, oh, we submitted 50 bids this year, and we weren't expecting to get all 50, we weren't expecting to get 40. We usually run about 10%, but this year we won 15 or 20%. So a good time to start planning for actually how you're going to execute on the project is when you're submitting the bids. When there's a known resource gap, when you know that you're bidding on projects that have a BIM scope or a component as a part of it, and you know that if you gave a call to your local hall or you're looking out in your local labor market and there seems to be a shortage in the amount of VDC or BIM professionals that you can hire and train, or the capacity to hire and train before those projects starts, and you see that there is a resource gap that exists in your region, it'd be a good time to start planning as to when and how you're going to solve that problem. Another good time that people don't really often think about is when you're changing software. As an example, if you're making a conversion from AutoCAD to Revit and your shop was AutoCAD first and they utilize that to complete their BIM projects and they wanted to switch over to like Revit in the future, a lot of people, it's a great time to start thinking about if the team members that you currently have will be able to make that digital transformation from AutoCAD over to Revit. If you need to start looking at people from the outside that has more skills in Revit, things like that, it's a good time to start thinking about that when you're making a software transition. And another great time is when you're slow. When you're slow, planning is not only about planning the people, but it's also about planning processes. How can you deliver more work more quickly? What are the processes and steps involved in delivering a BIM project successfully? How can we improve on what we already have? So those are good times to think about it. And one way to expand their capacity and to solve some of those resource gaps that exist as a result of your planning is through BIM company partnership. So it's a model that's increasing, and we're seeing increasing over the country. There's more and more BIM companies that pop up around local areas, and it's hard sometimes to evaluate and understand what it really looks like and the problems they actually solve. So I just wanted to just give you a full, kind of like a higher level overview of how and the third party approach to resource gaps. So basically, resources become available through two different methods. There's a project that had resources on it, either within your company or at another company that is ramping down, which means that there's a resources becoming available to the labor pool. Or there's a qualified applicant, somebody that's turned out from the apprenticeship, somebody just finished the AutoCAD or Revit course, somebody is just available and entering the market. They also are available as a resource to be used and on a BIM project. So there's basically two kind of ways that new resources emerge in the market. The local resource pooling method, which is most common, is contractor ABC Mechanical is in Texas, and they say, I'm signatory with these locals, and I am going to basically pull resources from these three locals and deploy them on projects in a specific area. We pull from one area, we deploy resources to another area. That's the local resource pooling method. Beyond the resource pooling method, though, is the national resource pooling method. So this is the differentiator between working within a local contractor versus working with a third-party contractor with ties to basically a national labor pool. In this model, one company, like a third party, like for example, BIM Designs, is partnered with several different locals across the country. And instead of just being limited to the resources that are available from these basically intrastate resources and locals and deploying them to a project within the state, now you can pull from locals from across the country in a national labor pool of quality resources, experienced field trained resources to deploy onto your project in that same area. So it just gives you an ability to pull from a greater labor pool. This increased ability to pull from a greater labor pool is the basis of next level resource planning. But in order to get started with even entertaining a third-party company or entertaining an additional solution that's external to try to drive productivity, you have to kind of conduct internally a readiness assessment. It's just like when I was thinking about hiring a housekeeper to come and clean my apartment. I knew I wanted a housekeeper to come in and clean. I just looked around and said, man, I wish she would just come in, or someone would just come and clean up and pick up things. But I had to kind of get my apartment ready first, just to make sure that the kind of mess that the person is going to be coming in to clean for me is a problem that they can solve, and it's easy for them to come in and understand where things go, are things labeled, what's ready, what's the system that I want this person to come in and follow. It's the same when you're looking at a third-party company that's coming into your organization. How do you get ready for it? So questions you should ask yourself are, what are your, where should you start resource planning? Like we talked about in the previous slide. What are your gaps? Is it in detailing? Is your gaps? And do you not enough detailers? Do you need more coordinators? Do you need more modelers? Do you just need more management? Where are the actual gaps within your organization? And asking yourself how to fill, or where you're gonna, what you're gonna plan to outsource. What's the bid process like? What's your internal bid process like? What does your estimating team expect? What do they need from you in order to deliver an estimate to a contractor or for a project? Who's the decision maker within your organizations? Who's going to be the person that decides and evaluates third parties? Is it the project manager? Is it going to be the BIM manager? So it goes back to who's responsible for solving the resource gaps that exist. Who would do the research in the third party options? The BIM manager that has to say, hey, I recognize I need a larger team. Is it going to be the project manager that says, I just called my BIM manager and I asked them to do BIM on my project and they told me they had no one. So I jumped online and tried to find somebody that can work, that can help support our production capacity and helping get this project delivered on time. Who will do that research? The next thing is one of the most important is, do you actually have processes to share? When you're bringing someone into your organization and you say, hey, I have this problem, can you solve it? Do you actually have the SOPs, workflows, QA/QC processes in place in order to make that successful, even to get the product that you're actually looking for? And the last one is one that is beyond the project budget, is what's your investment budget? I understand that there may be a need to specifically solve a particular problem on a project, but beyond the project, how can we think more deeply about that? So this is the assessment that you kind of have to go through, and the questions you have to ask yourself when entering and thinking about how to pull from a national talent pool as opposed to your local one. And so the first thing I wanted to just talk about in this whole process is seeking pricing and the request for proposal. And this is something that is I think one of the most important parts of seeking help from someone is knowing the help that you actually need. And so we don't believe in best practices. There's no such thing as a best practice, because 2 months from now, someone would say they come up with something that's even more improved than what I just did, what I discovered today. So I think there's good practices and there's what I like to call better practices. So there's always a better way to do something, and the search for better should never end. So the first thing that we should do is do your homework. A lot of companies come in and they don't necessarily know the scope of work. They'll say, hey, I got a call from the GC. I guess BIM is required on this project, so I'm just going to send you everything he sent me, look through everything and give me a price back for BIM. But beyond that, it actually is better for you as a contractor to actually read the specs and requirements, understand what it is that you want, decide on a sequence of operations. It's beyond the pricing of the job. One of the things that we notice that costs contractors a lot of money is when they ask and seek third-party resources and assistance for their projects, and they say, hey, I want you to give me this done. Okay, and they just kind of act as middlemen. This person asked for this and they pass, and they kind of act as that middleman within the process, but not really understanding the sequence and aligning on a sequence with their partner as to how to deliver the project and to make it successful. So you need to decide on a sequence of operations, and I'll talk about that in a little bit on the next slide. The next thing is during that bidding process, it's really, really important to assign a point of contact for questions and to actually expect questions. If when coming up with this, submitting a request for quote to third-party companies, and you don't have anyone available to actually answer the questions of the third party and just say, hey, just give me a price, just give me a price, give me a price. It actually limits the third party's ability to really give you that accurate price and actually fulfill the needs that you have. So make sure that there's a point of contact that's clearly stated. And when they email or call that, you should expect those calls. the other thing is make sure you submit seek pricing before submitting yours. What's really challenging when you're trying to plan for resources is when you're constrained to a budget that doesn't allow actually for the price to execute the project. Basically the price to execute the project beforehand. So a typical scenario will happen is people will bid on a project, or contractors will bid on a project. They'll plug in a BIM number that's a percentage of labor hours in the field or some percentage or metric, because this is what they typically utilize to calculate the BIM prices. They submit it, now they're locked into that budget. So when the contract is awarded, they say, hey, I only have $50,000 to work with. A third-party BIM contractor is different than an internal department, because they're just looking at the cost of doing BIM, and because their process and their primary product and service delivery is doing BIM. Typically, the cost of doing that will be about 15 to 20% higher than what it would necessarily cost you internally to perform that same scope of work. Why does that make sense, and how does that work, and why is that okay? Why that's okay is that even though it may be 20% higher for a third party to come in and do the same thing that you would do for 20% lower, you can actually scale that company to be unlimited in the number of, in the size and the amount of revenue that it can potentially bring your company. So it actually takes the gate off of your revenue potential for your company. So you can scale from 150 to 200 to $300 million, knowing that there's a scalable process that while it may cost a little bit more than you would, it'll actually make your company 50, 60 to 70% more revenue the year over year because of that increased capacity. So it's always important to seek pricing before submitting your own. The last one is deciding on a pricing and contracting method. There's a couple different ways that you can approach a third party and how you work with them. One of them is saying, okay, do I want just extra, no, I want an extra body. Do I have 11 people on my team right now and I can just use 12 or 13, which would be like a staff augmentation type situation. If you're looking for something like that, that's one contracting method that's probably best billed on a T&M basis with a bucket of hours. Do you want a lump sum bid? Do you want someone to just say, what's the price of doing it? And then you say, okay, great, this is the price of doing it. It costs you $50,000 to do XYZ deliverables. That's perfect. That's another way to get a project bid. But knowing that process has change order. The downside to that is the change order management process. So everything that is outside of that specific scope of work is going to require change orders. And obviously, that's an administrative burden that sometimes contractors and partners don't think about when they're working with a third party. So or sometimes you want to have a cost share or cost savings kind of approach, where basically looking at what is the cost to do the project, how can we maybe set a GMP contracting model or something along those lines in order to have a shared risk and shared savings. So decide on which contracting method that you want to employ with a third party is really important. And again, this is going along with that last bullet of assigning a point of contact for questions and expecting them. Stay in touch. If you know that you put a project out to bid, what's really important is that making sure that you don't lose your third party, because they're also bidding on 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different projects beyond the ones that you're seeking assistance on. So what happened to another company was that they had a BIM partner, they had identified them. They said, this is going to be perfect. I'm going to work with this company. They didn't talk to them for 4 weeks. The company went and had other bids that came in from another one of their partners. They ended up going with that job and no longer had the capacity to handle the projects that they had bid on with that original contractor. And that contractor came to us and was rushing, like, oh my gosh, I had this partner. I didn't talk to him in 4 weeks, but now I need the work, and they don't have any capacity to take it on. So it's really important to look at it as an interview process, actually, for both sides. This third party wants to know that you're going to work with them, that you're going to be in contact with them, because it's essential that communication is there. And also you're going to be interviewing that third party to make sure that they stay in touch with you. So it's always good to establish the rapport and stay in touch at the very beginning when seeking an RFP.
Yeah, and Steve, if you don't mind, I'd like to add a bit more just about staying in touch. What I've seen, quite often is a project will begin, right? We may have given them a bid, or we may have given them some numbers, but they decide, hey, we're going to do this internally. We've got it handled. But everyone knows in the construction world, projects don't always go perfectly, right? And then what that turns into is, there's been a schedule acceleration or some issues that have gone on, which now requires said companies to ramp up their needs. And just with that communication and staying in touch, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, this is that project that we looked at. We definitely can allocate some resources to you to help you out if anything were to go wrong throughout the project life cycle. So staying in touch is definitely an important thing to do when considering a third party.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Great. So so what we did was we took time and we thought about, well, if a client gave us a project and we were working on a project, what are the steps that it would take to complete this project from soup to nuts, beginning to end, from the kickoff to the project completion, and outline what those steps would look like, who's going to do the kickoff meeting, who's going to do the information gathering, what about the layout, what about revisions and comments, what is considered out of scope, and how will we handle those out of scope comments? What do we do for sign off? When do we know that it's reached? What are the QA/QC processes? How many rounds will there be? How many coordination meetings will there be? How many rounds of coordination revisions are included? Thinking about that sequence of operations, which is what is a part of the design of actually delivering a project, is something to really think about and to plan for when you're looking for a third party. And this is something that a lot of third parties will work with you on to develop in order to get you that delivery method. But that's something that you should be looking for when you're reaching out to a third party or you're trying to pull from a national resource pool. Is what is the actual process you go through to deliver the work? Sometimes just because this process is different than the one you run that you have internally, there can be a misalignment as to pricing and expectations there too. So it's a really good idea to align on what the actual process is. What is software specialties? So there's a difference between being able to be familiar and know how to turn a program on and how to use it versus actually deploying it on a project and having project deployment experience on that project. So ask yourself, what are your software specialties and what specialties do you require of your clients, of your third parties? One of the client told me that they were talking to a third party and they said, hey, are you able to use Evolve? And the person said, oh yeah, I know Evolve, we know Evolve. But then it got into the project and we had to actually use Evolve on the project, and it didn't go according to it wasn't the same as just turning the program on and knowing how to use it. So there was a misalignment in the actual effort that was required. And the third party was seeking a change order because, wow, this is so much more than we thought it would be, because we didn't actually never deployed it. So asking about, do you guys know this? And actually the next question is, how many projects have you actually deployed this software program on, and what was your success rate there, is the deeper and better question to answer and it will get you actually a deeper understanding of what their capabilities are. So just I talked about these good practices, and I did want to also talk about just an investment beyond the project. So building a partnership with a third party requires a time investment that's beyond the project costs. So if you're thinking that you're going to come in with a person that's a third party and you don't have some kind of allocation that's set aside for how you're going to make the partnership itself successful, how are you going to do onboarding, and there's some basic components of this investment, and what it includes is basically processes and SOPs. I was one of the biggest surprises that I had when working when coming in and working with BIM Designs and then working with different contractors across the country is how different and what levels of development even very, very established companies have in terms of their processes and SOPs. Some companies are, every single step, every single procedure, where to upload, when to upload, file structures, color coding, progress tracking, all those processes and SOPs are well documented where they can just say, here's our manual, here's everything, good luck. Sometimes those SOPs need a little bit more work to adjust for what works for you internally versus what works for you externally. So there's usually an investment that's needed in processes and SOPs to get that up to get those aligned. QA/QC staff. Sometimes people don't in understanding that you're going to work with a third party. When you give a third party a project and you say, hey, I want you to bid on this project lump sum for us, give me a price, it's done. Some people don't take they don't budget for internally having a person that's going to QA/QC that third party's work when it comes back in. Who's going to check it? Who's going to make sure it's constructible? Who's going to make sure it works in the field? Who's the superintendent on the job? What's going to be their percentage of involvement with the third party to make sure that this project is delivered successfully? Do we need a project liaison between the third party company and our internal company to make sure everything's successful? That's an investment that is beyond the project, but definitely needs to be accounted for. Communication planning. Who's responsible, who's accountable, who's going to be consulted, and who needs to be informed. That stands for it stands for what's called RACI. And RACI is a process that you can use to decide and understand how communication flows across an organization and in the execution and completion of a project. So communication planning, shared site setups. Will we use Bluebeam? Will we use Bluebeam Studio? Will we use BIM 360? How can we actually make sure that files are transferable between our two companies? Will we need a remote server? Will we need to do a Dropbox setup or situation? So those kind of that shared site setup is also an investment. And then actual deployment. For a lot of our companies, the best partnerships we have is when we actually have an actual implementation team or actual project starting kickoff meeting where we get alignment across all areas of the project, from accounting to QA/QC to project delivery to project management, to number of detailers to database. The database people are for both organizations are talking. So a deployment process that's beyond just the cost of the project is always really helpful in making sure that the project is successful. Of all the problems that contractors identify in working with third parties, the number one is quality. Their number one problem is, I sent this out to this third party, I told them what I wanted, and they gave me something completely different back. One of the most important questions to ask your third party and to get alignment on well before a project begins is how you define quality. Third parties can work from 1 to 10 to 50 different contractors across the country, and every one of them have different quality standards and what they decide and deem as quality. So what's some important things to include in a bid package when you're requesting that RFP? Always include deliverable examples. Gather 1, 2, or 3 deliverable examples of different project types and include them in that RFP request when you're requesting it of the third party. It's the only way you know that when they price something and when they say, oh yes, check the box, I'm going to give you shop drawings, that the shop drawings, or I'm going to give you spools with, you make sure that the number of viewports are the same, you make sure the annotations are the same. This does include title blocks, it doesn't include title blocks. Like, you have to make sure that deliverable examples are included to make sure there's true alignment. Checklists and standards. What are you looking for? What are you using internally to know that this was done correctly? This spool drawing has what you need versus not having what you need. This shop drawing has what you need versus not. Is the scale correct? Constructability standards. Is there a quality check between your team that receives it and the field? So is the field deeming what you're doing constructible? This last part is value engineering, and I'm putting it here under quality because a lot of contractors have expectations that a third party will obviously optimize routing, reducing fittings, reducing piping, reducing bends. Like, how do we make this constructible in the way that's easiest to install in the field? But also a good metric to follow is do a takeoff and see how many fittings are here. There's 1,000 fittings in this design. We would love to see you reduce that by 10, 12%. And then measuring it at the end to see what the goal was and how close that third party was in reaching that value engineering goal is also a good metric to keep track of and to include in your quality conversation, because that can be another metric that helps drive profitability. So I did want to talk about the last part is contracting. So the question is who would negotiate the contract? It's good to understand and decide who that will be from the very beginning. Is it going to be the general counsel for the company? Is it going to be the project manager for the team? Who needs to be involved in that process? Ask yourself, when you have a third party, do you have a contract that's specific to third parties and specifically to the scope of BIM? well, or does the normal vendor contract that you send to your material supplier or to someone else, will that suffice? So getting that, giving your contractor a good look over, or requesting a contract of that from that third party for your team to review and provide feedback on is really important at the beginning. I've seen a lot of projects. I think the longest contract negotiation we entered was about a month long before we could even get started on a project. We had back and forth with the general counsel, back and forth with the project manager, back and forth with the BIM. Everybody had feedback, and everybody was a stakeholder in the conversation. And sometimes it's longer than companies expect. So having and making sure that you get aligned on contract language, sometimes in the form of a master service agreement, is better even before the bid process, so that you can make sure that at least if we come to an agreement on the price, if we come to an agreement on the scope, we do have a way to define our relationship and set ourselves up for commercial in addition to technical success. So the other question is to ask yourself, who are the stakeholders? So with that being said, I did want to open up the floor. We have about 8 minutes left. So I wanted to just open up the floor for some questions and answers from the group, if there were any, about maybe resource planning challenges they have, some questions they had about working with third parties. Any kind of feedback or questions would be awesome if you guys had any.
Yeah, so I was just on the phone with a client recently that they're in quite a pinch, right? They don't have a BIM department. Well, they do have a BIM department. It's just 2 resources that just strictly do detailing. They don't have any managers, and they don't even estimate the work. They just essentially treat their resources as full-time employees. Whenever they have a project with BIM on it, they just put those detailers to work and hope it gets done, right? Meaning they're not planning or tracking anything. What that turns into now is that the resources are really struggling, and they've come to us for help, right? They've come to BIM Designs for help. But because they really didn't do any planning or estimating, they don't have the budget to hire on a third party for help. So now the resources just keep drowning. How would you suggest a company like that better plan for future projects?
Yeah, and I know that's a good question. So basically, I guess I would say if they came in and they didn't have a BIM department and now they want to come in and plan for it, I guess what I would do is ask the team, and I can stop sharing here. But I would also ask the company, what is the commitment and the investment in the project and in the overall success, and kind of get buy-in from the larger team as to what is our overall goal, right? How much room and capacity do we have to invest in a BIM partnership right now, beyond, for this project, but also beyond it, and ask yourself and think larger. I would always ask them to think larger than the project. Then we don't have enough money or budget for this particular project, but what do we really want from ourselves, and what kind of goals we have for our organization, and how can we reach them together? What kind of, that's how I would approach that.
That would make sense.
Sure. Great. Any other questions? Comments? Thoughts? Okay. Okay, awesome. Well, I just want to, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate that. We're going to make this recording, available. So if you want to take a look at this later, it'll be available to you. But also, if you join this webinar today and you did have a staff augmentation need for now through the rest of the year, if you get it booked, we're doing a promotion where we're waiving all basically mobilization fees, so you can get going and hit the ground running without necessarily having to pay that normal $1,500 mobilization fee. So if that's something you're interested in staff augmentation, I'd love to stick around and talk with you, or feel free to shoot us a message or go to our website and fill out a consulting request, and we can get you going. But I just wanted to thank you for taking your time to join us today and talk about how you can better plan for that next project that you may get in 2022.
I would like to actually talk to you afterwards, please.
Awesome. Great, Kevin. I'll give you a call right after.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
See you.